Good evening, everybody. Sorry, a little bit late this week. I kind of caught a cold or some sinus thing or something. Ended up being sick for a couple days and kind of not getting to this as I'd hoped to. So doing it Sunday night instead. Um, but yeah. So let's. This is the next uh, bands, letter bands in our in my Rusted Metal Northwest hard rock and metal bands focus that I've been doing weekly. This is letter K. Got a few from that. So um, we got, let's see, first off, we got some Canadian guys, Carrion, which is a thrash metal band. Kind of, I think, mid 80s to late 80s kind of period. This stuff was recorded 86, 87, Surrey, BC, and in the UK actually. So the 87 demos, it looks like. Oh no, that's where they restored and remastered it. Sorry. But yeah, friend Jason at Supreme Echo, who carried some of his releases, Cradle and some other things, which I'll be talking about in a minute. Um, this is pretty cool. So I think they're demos. It's got like I think it's got a bonus 45 in this. Oh no, it's got a booklet too. So that's kind of cool. So um, yeah, so those guys are kind of cool. Played the scene up there with Accused and other bands at the time, and which is Hammer and some of those guys. So it's kind of cool they got something out, and he's got the little Canadian metal hype sticker, which is pretty cool. That's what he specializes in, Canadian metal and punk. Let's see, going back to the 70s in Canada. Well, I have to take these plastic sleeves off. It's hard to see. So these guys were three brothers, the Carroll brothers, and there was another guy that was not related to him that was in the band as well. These guys were formed early 70s. Rumor was they had opened a couple shows for Kiss up there. Couldn't really corroborate it unless they were under a different name. Um, but they released some singles, had a couple albums. The singles are quite a bit heavier than the album, especially they do a couple Uriah Heep covers, which are really good. But I guess live they were supposed to be much heavier. They had all leather, kind of spike wristbands and armbands and leather pants and boots and the whole deal, kind of in the Kiss sort of realm. And I guess it was the very first concert Martin Popoff told me he saw was these guys in Trail, BC, where he grew up, at a hockey rink opening, I think, for somebody else. So. So yeah, Carroll Brothers, kind of an interesting little thing. Supposedly reformed in recent years, doing some shows up there. So we're going to continue on with um, another Canadian band. Probably the most well known of these, is he had the major label deal and toured around a good bit. Kick Axe, this debut is a really great record, Vices. They're on the Pasha label, recorded um, in Spencer Proffer's studio, so they came down to work with him, where Quiet Riot recorded their first couple albums, or first three albums, something like that, with in the 80s when they kind of reunited and had Mental Health and all that. Which always, that guy always got a really great guitar sound and drum sound and stuff in that studio. Um, and so that was their first record, probably a little more well known. They toured with like Whitesnake and Quiet Riot and some of those guys at the time. Played Portland a couple times. Local guys that I talked about. Talking about the Invader guys, the singer left the band briefly for about a year and a half and went down to Portland and actually was in a band called Triax, and they opened up at the Rock Theater for Kick Axe. Just they sound alike, put them on the same bill. This is the second album. It's a pretty good one too. Probably a little bit notched down, but it's got a really great, fun cover of With a Little Help from My Friends. It has a whole bunch of Canadian rockers on there, like Lee Aaron and Rick Emmett from Triumph, and a bunch of different people singing backup vocals and all that. So that's kind of a fun one. So they're pretty cool. More of a hard rock band, kind of a Quiet Riot realm. So they're pretty cool. Got some CD reissues in recent years. Um, These are Seattle guys, Kill the Core. Kind of an early thrash band. Their demos were, I think, 85 and 86. And so this guy, our friend at Lost Realm, friends at Lost Realm, Andre, and I forgot what the other guy's name is, did this, like 300 copies of this, a couple different colors, sold out right away. Did a cool CD reissue as well that just collects all 7 of their demos, a couple of which were on a comp track in this CD. Um, slipcase was way bigger than it needed to be, so I had to make like but it's got a cool poster and a photo of the guys and stuff, so that's kind of cool, and a fold out poster, and so that's kind of neat. And um, they were pretty cool. Like I said, kind of an early speed thrash metal band, Metal Church, Strychnine sort of realm, a little bit more power metal vocals type of stuff too. Um, let's see, what else do we got? Back to canon, we got Cradle, which this is another one that the Supreme Echo guy Jason put out, just the vinyl he usually does. And the Heaven and Hell guys actually put the CD out for this, as well as some stuff from early 2000s when one of the bass player, I think, reformed the band with some different members, as the original guys didn't want to do it. The singer, unfortunately, um, Todd, died in a boating accident in the late 80s. I guess they had some impetus of a record deal from Anima, or an offer, and their manager turned them down, thinking they were going to get a bigger deal. And so sadly, these guys never got. They just had like an indie release at the time they put out themselves, and this is really good stuff. I mean, they look a lot like Motley Crue, sound probably more heavier. I'd say Ozzy, definitely. The guitar stuff is in Randy Rhoads kind of influence realm with Wasp elements. Really good stuff. Definitely recommend picking up this or the CD reissue. These guys are kind of fun. So this is this band from Spokane, called Cracker. I think this is the only record they did. They had like a single also. They're also on the Primo Products record, which is what Doc Rocket, the label that released Doc Rocket's first record, and this is actually the came out a year before. This is, I believe, Tom Hall's first, the Triad engineer who worked on Queensryche stuff and many other things, and also the Doc Rocket debut. I believe this. He said this was the first record he worked on when he was at Eastern University, and it sounds great. Kind of a mix. You had 2 different singers, so one of the guys does the more hard rock stuff. It's kind of like Stryker, reminds me a little bit, which we'll talk about when we get to letter S. But um, one singer's more in the Beatlesque sort of realm, kind of a poppier stuff. Kind of ELO reminds me a little bit of it. Also, the whole record kind of reminds me of Rick Derringer too, especially those couple Derringer albums like Sweet Evil and the self-titled one. Kind of some good, real heavy hard rock stuff, little bit of southern type of feel to it. There's a little bit of kind of Nugent, Pat Travers type of vibe on this too, on some of the songs, but definitely the stuff that this fellow Michael sings is the heavier hard rock stuff. The stuff that Steve sings is the more poppier kind of ELO-ish type of stuff. So it's kind of a mix of AOR and pretty heavy hard rock with some southern rock type vibe. Pretty heavy for 78 though, some of the stuff. So it's pretty good. Kind of an underrated one. I used to think they were kind of a country band, somebody had told me, and when I heard this I was like, oh, this is not at all what it is. So well worth picking up. It's usually not too expensive to if you can find a copy around here. Um, let's see, Kodakon. We can get, there we go. So these guys, of course, had a track on the Northwest Metal Fest compilation in '84. Forget where they were from exactly. I think the northern end of Seattle kind of area, if I remember right. Couple brothers in the band. Um, kind of, adventurous metal, Iron Maiden sort of realm, that sort of thing. Kind of fantasy and fiction type lyrics, Dio and Maiden and that sort of thing. So a couple different sets of demos they did at a couple different points, including the first one that had the track on Northwest Metal Fest. So this was also Lost Realm put this out years back. Didn't do vinyl of this for some reason, just the CD. But pretty cool liner notes and stuff as they usually do. Worth picking up. Um, we have had some copies of Lost Realm and Supreme Echo, that sort of thing, on our website. I probably should mention, which I kind of forget usually to mention. If you're looking for some of that stuff, we tend to carry other people's stuff as well. Um, of course, Metal Meltdown Volume 1 compilation I talked about does include, um, this was the first appearance for Kill the Core, which was one of the demo tracks on there. Also, Caliber was a metal band that's on here. It's pretty cool. From uh, uh, they recorded at Triangle, which became Reciprocal, from Uniclaw. So, and then yeah, and then Kill the Core had a track also on the second Metal Meltdown. So much like Coven, they had a couple tracks on a couple of the compilations that the um, label owner Dave Portnow liked these guys a lot. I think he even put out a split single with Kill the Core and Max Planck, I want to say. Also, so that's kind of cool. Let's see, these guys are not punk. I mean, not metal, definitely early punk, but also kind of more in the garage punk sort of realm was King Bee, Fred Cole's band, 70s, who opened for the Ramones and was one of the first Portland punk bands when the kind of that wave came in 77. Um, and they played a lot around. Mark Sten was the bass player, and Pat Connor, that was Fred's wife Tootie's brother. So his brother-in-law he taught to play drums, much like he taught Tootie to play bass. And other, they just like get who he wanted in the band and teach him how to play. That guy was amazing. So this is original 7-inch. Was the only thing they put out. Um, Self-release, which Fred pressed up on his lathe himself, and as he often did. So was really happy to be able to get this from a friend of mine who was parting with it for a pretty reasonable price for what it was. It's pretty rare. And then a friend of mine, Kelly Halliburton, drummer from who played drums in Pure Stereos, but he's a guitarist and bassist in other punk bands like Problems, and he was in a couple of earlier ones back in the day. Um, he put out this on his own label, which is an expanded release of the 7-inch with the 3 songs, plus a lot of unreleased demos and live stuff from that time period of 77, 78, which is really cool. And the CD he did as well, which has um, some extra tracks. So that's kind of cool. So I don't have anything from these bands, but I thought I'd mention them as I got a couple little flyers, which this was Captain Crunch, Portland band. They had this festival of rock, which is really neat. It was like a 3-day Starry Night festival with all these bands. Pretty all local bands, mostly Oregon bands. I think there's a couple Washington bands in here. For the K's, we got, um, Kill Rock, Crimson, Kid Wicked, and then a couple others we'll talk about in L. Also, I wanted to mention I forgot Body Bag, which was a cool. Travis Dahman was in that band, and he called me out. I forgot to mention him. Body Bag. I saw him once. They're actually pretty cool thrash bands. I saw him with Savior and Dead Conspiracy or somebody like that. Um, but yeah, kind of forgot a few as I was going. I'm trying to show the ones I have pictures or things to show off. Um, so Kill Rock was another thrash band from Portland that was pretty cool. Lasted a few years, I think, 87 to early 90s kind of range. Um, uh, there's a couple bands that kind of evolved into other things like Kinder Morgan stuff. I got to mention Kiss Porky. Don't have any recorded material. I guess there was a live radio recording that they did. So these guys were like one of the first hard rock proto metal bands out of Washington. They formed in '69. 3 of the guys were in the band, the hippie band Fat Jack, which is a psych band. Were kind of most known for um, they promoted a bunch of shows under the name City Puke to make fun of City Zoo and Pat O'Day's championing the band and stuff. And so they put them all over the telephone poles and got some trouble. And they broke up and then formed Kiss Porky And as the founding member Bruce Kirkman, guitarist, um, said they were kind of a heavy metal punk rock band back then, in the vein of the Sonics and MC5 and Black Sabbath, who he specifically names. So they were pretty heavy. And I interviewed their last drummer, who was in the band from 73 to 75, Gary Williams, who's also in um, a few other bands like Silverlow that I will mention later on. Um, who was a real heavy drummer, kind of in the John Bonham type of mode, is why they got him. But I guess these guys were so loud that they got kicked out of a lot of the bars and banned from playing places, so they had to play biker bars and stuff. So, like, it definitely sounds pretty punk rock and metal for the time. And they did some radio, like a couple, like a live broadcast or two, I guess, on KZOC in the day. And unfortunately, none of both those guys don't have any copies of it taped from it. So if anybody out there has something, let's hear it. It'd be pretty awesome. So um, let's see, anybody else? Krakatoa was a band. I interviewed um, guitarist Paul Hansen from the band, or 70s band. That was kind of like one of his first bands. Played a lot of school dances for bookings with Unicam and a lot of those guys. And um, uh, the bassist was also Brian West. And Paul and Brian went on later on to be in. Paul did Brooklyn Brats, which had a release out and played a lot of, moved down to LA, as did Brian. Brian was in London. That was Nikki Sixx's band. He actually replaced him. And then Paul also taught movie stars how to play guitar. He worked at the Guitar Institute down there, and taught Michael J. Fox to play guitar, and also ended up being in his band in Back to the Future. So it's kind of a cool, famous thing there. So I think that's it. Next week will be letter L, so we'll talk to you guys then. And I'll try to get done a little earlier in the week, as usual, kind of. I ended my weekly episode, and then I realized I totally forgot one band. I'd be ashamed not to include these guys. This is Kidskin. They had this EP out in, I believe, early '85. Some pretty good hard rock. This featured Steve Adamak on drums from Bighorn and the Allies, Joe Shikany on vocals from Bighorn and the Allies, and also later in Rail he played guitar. After Rick Knotts left, also Rick Dunn, that was in Phoenix, which was the post Open Fire band. So yeah, this is pretty cool. And kind of a Marilyn Monroe looking model. Shelley Renee, I guess, was kind of well known at the time, supposedly. So yeah, so that's kind of a cool EP to find. This was actually a sealed copy I was fortunate to get from my good friend Jim Sutton, that I opened up and played, of course. So all right, we'll see you next week.